All right, I have 12:15, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I know Dr. Smith has a lot of great information, so I want to give him as much time as possible. And so I want to welcome you all again to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Stephanie McLaughlin. I am the Training and Evaluation Specialist with Partners Resource Network. We are the nonprofit agency that operates the Texas statewide network of parent training and information centers. We are funded through the Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. Our projects here in Texas are known as PACT, PACT and TEAM. At Partners Resource Network, we strive to empower and support Texas families and individuals impacted by disabilities or special healthcare needs. And also joining us today from Partners Resource Network is our Executive Director, Teresa Howell, our Director of Statewide Services, Christina Henning, our Support Specialist, Chelsea Rivas, and our Technology Specialist, Zach Hidalgo. If you're having any technical difficulties, please reach out to Zach in the chat box and he'll be happy to assist you with those. And please be on the lookout for information and links in today's webinar to the PowerPoint presentation from Chelsea in the chat box. For those of you that are needing a certificate of attendance, you will receive an email to thank you for attending today's webinar. If you'll follow the link in that email, you can get your own certificate of attendance. And at the end of our presentation today, we'll have a little bit of time for question and answer. So please put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll be sure and catch those. We are also recording today's webinar, and a recording of the webinar will be available on our website at prntexas.org. And so let me introduce our speaker. Our presenter today is Sean J. Smith, Ph.D. Dr. Smith is a professor in the Department of Special Education at the University of Kansas. Dr. Smith's research interests focus on innovations and technology solutions to support struggling learners and those with disabilities, particularly interventions aligned with the Universal Design for Learning framework. Dr. Smith has authored over 100 books and articles, given hundreds of scholarly presentations, both nationally and internationally, and he serves on various boards for journals, organizations, and parent groups focused on enhancing the lives of individuals with disabilities. And so welcome, Dr. Smith. I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And Stephanie, thanks so much for as folks were popping in, not only giving me a where everyone's from, but giving me a geography lesson for the great state of Texas. So I'm going to turn on my captioning for those that need that and where that would be helpful. As Stephanie mentioned, faculty member at the University of Kansas, and I'll get to that here in just a moment, but we have a limited time together. And I have a resource that if you take a look at the slides and you start counting them up, you're like, okay, we're going to be here for a couple of days. And we could be, but I wanted to share with you resources and I'll explain those as we finish up here. There was so much to put in and so many different directions to go. But where I'm going to try to focus is thinking about technology and thinking about transition in a broad sense, in a specific sense, and then a couple sideways, okay? We'll talk about today, we'll talk about tomorrow, we'll talk about some digital tools, and we're going to talk about transition overall. Okay, there's the link to the presentation. And of course, as Stephanie mentioned, I think one of her colleagues has already placed that or will be placing that in the chat or the resource that you guys generally have access to at the end of this presentation. So, but that's the link. And the reason I'm giving you the link is as I go along here, a number of things I will talk about and share are hyperlinked off the Google slide presentation for resources for later on. All right. Now, Stephanie did a phenomenal job of having folks post in the chat as you're going along. Of course, I had this in here before. I haven't taken it out. I do have the chat open here, though. So if you want to share where you're from, I'm not going to get that narrative in terms of where that part of Texas is from Stephanie, though. But anyways, feel free to share that. I'll share a little bit more about myself. As Stephanie did in that wonderful introduction, I do a number of different things. I do want to emphasize a couple things, and I'll illustrate them later, but I'm all about technology that can make life more efficient and effective for the individuals we serve. And so that's where I lead, and I believe strongly that technology is not an add-on. It's not a nice little thing. It's not a shiny toy. All the time, sometimes I'm a bit of a squirrel. Oh my gosh, shiny toy. For those of us that have seen Up and remember the dogs and squirrel, never mind if you haven't, but very much there. But I'm also a parent. I'm a parent of a 21-year-old with Down syndrome. And so I am right in the middle of this transition. And oh my goodness, with all the planning and all the things that we've gone on, pandemic threw us for a loop, but a lot of lessons learned along the way that I want to share with you. And I know from your introductions, you're coming at this from a variety of different perspectives. And that was one of my challenges. And how many things do I include and how, et cetera. And so I've made some compromises, and I know I'm not going to hit at every single minute for everybody, but I hope the nuggets I share along the way will be enough for you to visit. So let me introduce my son to you. This was a couple years ago, and I do this for a couple different reasons. One is to introduce Nolan, but also to introduce to you some data. And I'll talk to you about data here in just a second, because I think data is so critical for everything we do in preparation for the transition and the process of the transition to determine if the transition's been successful and everything in between. And of course, digital tools are making that data collection so much easier today. But here we go. No. As you're figuring out, Nolan was just crowned king of the homecoming court. And that's why I include it for the data part, folks. And that is that, to me, his transition element to where he is today was critically based on his ability to be included in meaningful things along the way to get the skill development for him to be successful. And yes, I'm preaching to the choir, and many of us are working that way. And yet I would argue, and there's some data in terms of his successful inclusion, sadly, they're not chanting Tiffany, 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 and that was his the queen there. But rather, I think that was relevant to the fact that they knew Nolan, they were engaged in Nolan, and Nolan was in their classrooms, unlike many instances where we're not getting that exposure. And again, the reason I'm mentioning this, yes, I want to introduce Nolan, but it's not successful without digital tools. Nolan was using digital tools basically third grade and on, and he still uses digital tools regularly for his success in this this effort to continue transition. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we go along. All right. So let's start off right from the get-go with some resources that if you're not familiar with, and I imagine many of you are, but if you're not, you need to be familiar with them right off the get-go. So first one here, and honestly, we could spend this entire hour talking about the next 3 or 4 resources I've identified. One is the Transition Coalition. Now, the Transition Coalition is one of several resources out there that are web-based, and no, it's not all about technology, but it's a technology tool that we can utilize as educators, as parents, as service providers, whoever we are in this transition process. I'm going to go there real quick. And the Transition Coalition, and yes, the closed caption went off. I apologize for the moment, but I want to emphasize the fact that the Transition Coalition has all sorts of different resources. They have a resource hub on products and materials, presentations. They have tools, including assessment, and I'm going to talk about that just a moment. They have a variety of trainings, including mini modules, webinars, and a variety of other resources. So I can't emphasize enough how important the Transition Coalition is. Now, oftentimes in the transition process, and I experienced this myself with Nolan, is we're not collecting the right type of data for transition assessment. There are some excellent ones out there that were actually developed right there. They're published out there in Texas. Gary Clark, a colleague of mine, is one of the primary on the transition assessments out there. I think his version right now is in version 4, and there's a link right off the Transition Coalition on their assessments to Gary's work. He does it with a gentleman by the name of Dr. Patton, so it's Clark and Patton is their work, and sometimes it's Patton and Clark, but They do some phenomenal work on transition assessments, and they are now technology based in that they actually have a test bank of items that you can utilize. They're online, you can collect them, they analyze them, and they offer a dashboard for you on the results. There's still paper pencil versions, and the transition assessments go across so many different elements. There's a whole suite of items you can utilize, as well as some central ones. And of course, they're for a variety of stakeholders to complete: the parent or the adult in the home, the individual we're talking about, and of course, the educators and stakeholders servicing that individual. So Transition Coalition offers so much information for our consideration. Another resource out there, and to me, there's probably a good number in Texas. And so I'd urge you to go to these. I go to one in Ohio just because I've worked with them. Plus, I know the outcome of this work. And they also have a big national impact here. They have a national conference that brings in thousands of people annually in the area of autism, intellectual disabilities, developmental delay. And one area they focused a good amount on is transition. They're using virtual reality applications to help in terms of transition processes. They're being fairly innovative. And here again, they're hyperlinked. I will not go to their website, but hyperlinked to a variety of different reports, resources, tools they've created for that transition to adulthood. And again, they're focusing on individuals with more complex needs, individuals with disabilities that are in need of transition supports. A third resource, and then I'm going to kind of shift gears here, but a third resource for all of us to consider that if we're thinking post-secondary options is Think College. Many of us are probably familiar with it, but Think College, folks, they have invented the wheel, and they're running with it, and they're revising it, and they're interconnected with people that are doing it. I'm living in a college program right now with my son that does some very good work, but at times I think they forget wheels have been created by others, and let's utilize some of those wheels. So Think College is out there. It's out of Boston, but it is a nationally funded site that many of us are probably familiar with that facilitate ideas about thinking about post-secondary options for the children we're serving. This is a great site for those of us working in this area to create environments and opportunities. This is a great site for those of us working with children to get them ready for these college types of experiences. This is a great site for parents that are trying to understand not only what colleges exist, but what type of skills need to be developed if my child is going to be successful in these post-secondary opportunities. But they also have future Quest Island exploration. It's beyond just thinking about college. It's a great transition and career gain for middle schoolers and high schoolers with disabilities to think about options and experiences and ideas for their post-secondary lives. And there's a host of other things here on this site. I'd urge you to go. There's some great tools, great resources, and it's been great for me. You know, I think of Ruby Rainbow. Ruby's Rainbow is their affiliated in Texas, and they do a phenomenal job of funding youngsters. They have funded hundreds of individuals to go on to college, and Think College has created an environment to help other institutions now. There's 300 plus that offer post-secondary opportunities. But even if you're not thinking post-secondary opportunities, there's so much more here in terms of preparation, like Future Quest Island. All right, so let's think about these digital technologies in general, though, and think about these technologies when we come to think about transition. And I have COVID and Warp Speed there, and that's that Star Wars and Chewbacca and Han Solo. And where I'm going with Warp Speed is I do want to recognize the fact that COVID, this is a silver lining. And oh my goodness, can I talk about the nightmares? And from a transition process, oh, let's do some group therapy on what we had planned and double planned and had 3 or 4 backup plans. And then COVID hit, and we're punting to backup plan 4 or 5 for Nolan. Yeah, but there are some silver linings. So one silver lining for me is the fact that these digital technologies have significantly advanced, and we've made some significant jumps. We're still living through it. And what does that mean? I want to emphasize it with some examples and some things that are with us today and right around the corner for us to consider when it comes to transition and the like. All right. So with that said, I thought maybe we'd take a moment here, and I'm going to escape out of this site real quick, and I'm going to pop this over to our chat. And actually, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. so I can get this into our chat. And if you'd like, if you would, I'm just going to make a chat open here. If you would, pop over to, and I put it in the chat. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. If you would, as we're kind of going along here, feel free to, in this Padlet, feel free to share some of the digital technologies that you're thinking of when you're using or thinking of when it comes to transition. And for those of us that haven't used a Padlet, this is a bit.ly. I put it in the chat. It's right here as well. I'm going to click on it and just let you know that when you think of tech and transition currently, you know, what pops into your mind, and you can just click on this little button down here to add in. And the reason I'm doing this is, yes, I'd like to know, but this could be a great resource for all of us. There might be some technologies that some of us are coming in saying, these are go-to, use them, and Sean doesn't even mention them. Great, share away. And again, the bit.ly is in the chat area, but it's also there as well. And if you're trying to type that in as it is, make sure you use the uppercase letters when they're uppercase. So that capital D is a capital D, and the uppercase Q is uppercase Q. P is uppercase, G lowercase. Otherwise, you type it in and you pop over there. Because of time, I'm not going to, I'm going to pop back over there in just a second or two for the moment, and then I'm going to move on. But feel free to add on as I start sharing some ideas, and then I'll pop back over there every now and then in the next half hour to see where we are. So let's just see if anyone's popped over there just yet. Oh, someone is. Hi, great. All right. And again, feel free to share. You click on this. It allows for a subject. You can type in something about what so I love this tech, and then you go ahead and press return. It'll publish. You can press publish. I'm not going to put that in there. I'm going to delete it, discard it, and I'm going to move on. Okay. And I'm going to refresh. Okay. So feel free to add if you'd like to. If not, we're good. Okay. So let me go back over here, get the captioning back on. And all right, so I figured the way of structuring this conversation about technology and transition, I thought I'd emphasize some priorities. Now, some of you are saying, Sean, you're 15 minutes in. Wait a minute here. Well, I thought I'd share some general resources that are digital based, Transition Coalition, the Ohio Center, Think College. I could go on, but those are good resources to begin with. But now I want to kind of break things down even further and think of how these digital technologies we have with designing and planning for our learners can be really critical. And so in doing so, I'm going to kind of cover some things that, yes, are a reflection to things we might do at the middle school or at the high school level, or during the 18 to 21 experience that could help for that transition happening in the 18 to 21 or post, okay? And then do it also in terms of overall planning that to me goes across the lifespan. I'll probably offer some examples educationally, but I'll try to make an emphasis in terms of how we think of across the lifespan as well. So all in this design planning, all with digital technologies in mind. All right, so as I'm preparing for technology, I want to collect data, I want goals and benchmarks set, things of that nature. All right, so what I wanted to do is I thought I'd give an example in terms of the planning with the IEP process. All right, now, I've got some other resources in there, but I'm going to move along here. And you're like, Sean, okay, the IEP process, yeah, we do that all the time. Connect it out here for me with the digital and the transition. Well, first of all, silver lining, I think, is the IEP process has gone digital to a degree. Now, my son, his IEP, we were doing IEP face-to-face prior to the pandemic. Okay, and he's no longer has an IEP. He's at the University of Kansas's 2-year program. But my daughter, I still have a daughter in high school, and we're doing all our conferences and all our engagements online. I'm loving it. I've sat in on a number of IEP meetings over this last year as an advocate and as a representative. I'm really liking it, and I'm hearing very good feedback to it. It's not perfect, but let me emphasize why I want to think of it. First of all, when I think of the different technologies I can use when we go more digital, even if we're face-to-face, there's digital technologies we should consider that to me will heighten the planning process for the transition that is happening or will happen. So first of all, I think it makes the meeting potentially more effective. Why? Maybe stakeholders that aren't able to be there, that are critical to be there, they are now there via Zoom. And of course, Zoom offers us lots of different options. I want to reinforce that in just a moment. In addition, though, it allows us potentially to share information in a much more transparent manner. Information that is data that we've collected, and examples we want to emphasize, potential sites that we want to think about for transitioning. Why wouldn't we videotape elements of that? Why wouldn't we, in terms of sharing information, videotape what the child is doing or not doing? Nolan presented at every single IEP meeting. Why wouldn't we have Nolan videotape that presentation for us to watch during the session or prior to the session? Or why wouldn't we, when data collection, if we've seen a student struggle in certain issues, their speech may be fine when it comes to a quiet room, but have them speak out in an environment that's more of a work environment or a community environment, and where they struggle and they stumble and the fluency is quite challenged, that would be an excellent assistance to a speech and language pathologist at the high school level looking to end services because things are fine in a quiet room. By the way, that happens to countless individuals with Down syndrome. There's national data to show we generally lose services freshman, sophomore year of high school. And yet it's critical to continue during that time. And I know we personally fought that battle sophomore year, and we had to bring in technology evidence, as I just mentioned, videotape of Nolan trying to interact with people at Walmart and other environments and showing how difficult that was. But I could go on of different ways we could use digital technologies in our meetings beyond just simply the platforms. But the platforms also allow us to be able to bring in individuals for a 5-minute interaction, and then they go on through the rest of their day, for individuals that are across different buildings. And when it comes to transitions, of course, and I'm going to pop back, no, this was Nolan's last IEP meeting, maybe a bit extreme, but in that room there, we have transition people. We also have his current team. We have his special educators. We have a variety of professionals. That might be quite large for your average meeting, but I'd argue your average IEP meeting for transition or transition planning will be larger because you're going to bring in people from the outside. Maybe the child already has a case manager with a VR. Of course, within the school system, there's going to be individuals that maybe do more transition that are not traditional to the meeting. Bringing them in face-to-face might be quite challenging. In the process, instead, we can use various technologies to do it. And by the way, states like Wisconsin and others have created virtual IEP tip sheets. Take a look at some of those. It might be the fact that it's hybrid. Some of you are face-to-face, some of you are online. Yes, and I'm spending a few extra minutes on this because I really do believe this is a silver lining. This can bring in those experts that I've heard countless times over the years. We're going to have a separate meeting. They're not available. These are some people you'll meet with later on. It's disconnected. We're not interaction. We're not planning together. But more importantly for me, beyond all the things I've just tried to emphasize, is because of the online or because of the digital or because of the hybrid type of application now with the IEP process, we can start changing what we do for the process. If you're unfamiliar with a MAP process, I'd urge you, this would be the one nugget I would take away from this presentation, making action plans. Making action plans is a process, is perfect for the IEP. And by the way, I did this with Nolan beginning in 3rd grade, all the way through his last IEP. And our school district said IEP meetings are 45 minutes or less, nothing beyond that. And Nolan, we did that within those confines. Now, for those of us unfamiliar with it, the simple aspect of the MAP process is all together, and just get a big piece of butcher paper or poster paper and you put it up on the wall, and one of your team members is up there writing down, when everyone just throws them out there, strengths and the needs of the child. But more importantly for transition, what are the dreams of the child? So for example, early on in Nolan's process, he was saying, I dream to have a house. I dream to be married. I dream to have a job and to be speaking. Now, folks, in terms of the job and speaking, communication, 3rd, 4th grade, we're speaking to the speech and language pathologist about what are the skills Nolan's going to need to be able to have to be working independently, to have that dream. And by the way, the whole team is often behind those dreams. And so now we're no longer thinking of that 1 year as we do in an IEP meeting. We are thinking beyond it. So middle school, we're thinking transition. High school, we're thinking transition. Elementary school, we're thinking transition. And of course, during the transition process. I've given you several different links to various ways the MAP process has been done. This is a video illustration of actually incorporating the MAP process. It's 30 minutes. It plays it out. It offers an illustration. This is Nolan's 4th grade MAP. Folks, I know it's a bad picture, but I have it framed. It's in my office. And the dreams from 4th grade are very much dreams he still has, but it changes the conversation. And when we use digital technologies to bring people in for a few minutes to offer some of these ideas, or maybe we do this collectively, all virtually, it just offers opportunities with the digital technologies to change the IEP process. And by the way, you still get to the goals, you still get to the goals, you still get to the benchmarks, which of course is what we need to create for the IEP. There's some good videos on it. I'll stop there. And by the way, there's some good tools out there to talk about how to facilitate a virtual IEP or a hybrid IEP to get more people involved, to get more sharing involved, everything like that. All right. And again, to me, I think this is critical for that really planning for the transition over the years to come. All right. So of course, there's lots of different reasons for us to communicate with the various stakeholders, particularly home and school and home. Since I'm talking about the IEP, I feel I need to at least mention a few things. A lot of resources here about what teachers can use, et cetera, to illustrate things. But what I wanted to emphasize is there's some great resources that have been created to enhance our communication process. And I think that's critical with transition because we're involving lots of different teams, lots of different stakeholders. For Nolan, he was under a waiver. And so we had a waiver person in there. We also had the transition people for the district. He didn't have a voc rehab, but I don't know how many IEPs I've heard about where the voc rehab person's not there. And yet, if you talk to the Office of Special Education Programs, they're like, of course we want the voc rehab person there. And you talk to a lot of voc rehab agencies, of course, they'd like to at least be aware of some of that interaction because that's so critical to the transition. So how do you facilitate that interaction? And there's opportunities that educators have created for podcasts and videos to illustrate, to share, to communicate. There's great ways for podcasts for teachers to share how to use that technology, ideas of how they use it, not only educationally, but to communicate with a variety of others involved, not just special education, just in that educational process. And then here are some great tools out there technology-wise to communicate with families. And I'm a big one in terms of this transition process. In the family unit, maybe a grandma, maybe a grandpa, and maybe a foster parent, and maybe mom, and maybe dad, and maybe one or the other, and maybe an adult sibling. But anyways, how to communicate. And today, I think that silver lining with a lot of technologies allows for a lot of that flexibility. So I've tried to give you some resources. Counties, and I know down in Texas, your center has done a lot of this, but also counties like Broward County, it's that large district there near Miami, has created parent universities to further empower their parents as well. So using digital technologies in a variety of ways to engage those stakeholders. Okay, so, and here's another one in terms of Hawaii and Edutopia and a variety of other places there. So resources that might be helpful for some, may not be helpful for others. And then of course, the various tools that are out there digitally that we can use to communicate between home, school, home, which I think is such a critical element. What a surprise. I'm a parent of a child with a disability. All right, so priority 1 as well. Okay, so I'm rushing through this and I hope you're connecting a little bit in terms of what I'm rushing through, but if not, those resources are there for your further reflection. But I wanted to pivot a little bit and think more about the design and planning overall for what we're trying to do to support that child and the development of skills or the young adult. Child, my son's 21 and he's still my child. So I'm using that loosely, I apologize. But anyways, where I'm going here is that planning, not only in that high school environment or that middle school environment or in that 18 to 21-year-old program environment, but also beyond that in terms of the community placements, the community settings, the living experiences and all that, to me, takes some planning and designing to remove barriers, to allow for us to be able to facilitate their strengths, to allow them to be as self-determined as possible. So with that in mind, I immediately go to something many of you are familiar with, and that was mentioned earlier, I think in the introduction, in my introduction, but universal design for learning. I've been in a number of meetings today, and we've been talking UDL in these meetings. If you're familiar with it, great. If you're not, here's a quick image to illustrate it. So in these two first images, You see the fence is there. The fence is necessary. It protects the athletes from the fans from the athletes. Those boxes are there to go from equality to equity. And of course, those boxes are there to help the individuals that are shorter see over the fence. Perfect, great. The third visual, of course, the fence stays, but the barrier has now been eliminated because the fence is transparent. So I don't need the boxes. Okay, fine, simple, Sean. But see, it's not so simple. To me, part of our planning and designing and what we're trying to facilitate with this transition is what are the barriers? And let's try to reduce those barriers, because otherwise we'll need to create boxes. And we may not be there to create the boxes, or the boxes the child needs to use may not be in a manner that they can use independently. So as far as I'm concerned, I'd like to eliminate or at least reduce the boxes by designing barrier-free or barrier avoidance or limited barriers. And so universal design for learning kind of gives me that direction. So for those of you unfamiliar with the framework, it's 3 principles and it has guidelines and several other things. This is not hyperlinked, but the next one is hyperlinked to UDL if you need to get a little bit more to it. But basically, folks, allows individuals opportunities to respond in a variety of different ways. So when I'm thinking of some of my job placements, when I'm thinking of some of my post-secondary opportunities, when I'm thinking of some of the experiences I want the child to receive in high school, but traditionally, sorry, that child wouldn't have options to that. Well, if I design things from a UDL framework, I will have options for that. And I could think of that increasingly for my own son. The skills he developed in high school were very much in the inclusionary environment, but he needed options to be able to participate, allowing him to respond differently. And I can go into that in great detail in a whole nother conversation, but simply put, instead of an essay or instead of a writing assignment, give me some more flexible options. He did a lot of things with video and things of that nature. But, and then of course, in terms of that skill development, he's still doing that in post-secondary, but it goes beyond learning. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. We want self-regulation. We want to develop that. And it just doesn't happen overnight. And oftentimes in our school system, we get a lot of prompting and a lot of support from adults that we're unaware of. And sadly, it tends to restrict the individual, particularly when we find that individual out in a community setting or a work setting where that adult is no longer there, or that job coach needs to disappear, or we don't have job coaches anymore. And we're realizing, oh, shoot, the self-regulation support was a bit of a hindrance. And so UDL really talks about developing self-regulation. It also gives individuals task options to be able to complete things. It allows individuals to synthesize information. And that to me is critical in our transition efforts, in our directions, and understanding what's important and understanding what's necessary, let's say for a job placement or for independent community living or for transportation. How can we synthesize information so they can understand it and be as independent as possible? Of course, from a learning perspective, that's really critical. I don't have enough time to go into that detail. And of course, we're always looking to activate what our child or the individual, the adult, the young adult. I feel I've used child so much, you're going to be hitting me for it. But the individual, for the individual, activate their background knowledge. How can we take that and facilitate that? The Universal Design for Learning does that. So let me give you one last example with UDL. I'll give you some resources and we're going to shift from there. But to me, if I'm not planning for that transparent fence, then I'm working around barriers and barriers and barriers, which are restricting opportunities for the youngsters I'm working with, restricting growth opportunities, and so much more. So here's that framework one more time. And so here's engagement. And so the one is provide multiple means of engagement, provide multiple means of representation, and allow the individual to demonstrate what they know through a variety of different action expression opportunities. So another way of looking at this, though, is from an engagement perspective. I'm going to go across and then down. So let me go across first. So some of you may be able to see this, some of you may not, so I'll say it out loud. Provide options for recruiting interest. So a UDL framework says this is something that's critical for foundational. Great. Now, by the way, UDL gives us examples of how to do this. It gives you checkpoints how to do this, et cetera, et cetera. But for my example, I want to emphasize the fact that there's a bicycle here and there's an adult bicycling and the children or the individuals we're serving are along for the ride. We're doing the recruiting interest in this instance. And a lot of things we do to engage our learners to develop some of their skills, we're doing a lot of their work for them. But instead, what we want to do, and this is where the framework kind of takes us through step by step, gives us a pathway, a bit of a map. And it says, well, wait a minute here. We need the individual to bike with some training wheels. So we'll give them some support while they look to persist. They look to sustain their effort for engagement. And then finally, this example here is we want to develop their self-regulation skills, their self-assessment, their self-monitoring, capture their executive function abilities. We want them to be on their own 10-speed. Well, honestly, folks, this doesn't happen when we begin 18 to 21 services. And this doesn't happen when we begin high school. This is a type of thing that we need to plan for in elementary and then build upon in middle. So they're riding that 10-speed, hopefully in high school and beyond. The framework gives you the vision. The framework gives you the pathway. The framework gives you ideas. So as the example, like self-assessment, that's part of the framework, but it's also an evidence-based practice where you're engaging the individual. It's a skill that then I can take over to the job site to better understand through self-assessment, am I doing the task that's asked of me? Where am I missing sequencing? What do I need to do better, et cetera, et cetera. My goodness, my son right now in the job he's working with in the evenings on the weekends, we're using this skill. It's a critical skill and breaking it down from some techniques he utilized in high school and building upon that. For those of us that want to know more about Universal Design for Learning, I have several different resources here that are more school-based in terms of lesson plans to break things down at the middle school, high school, and even in your 18 to 21 programs, depending if you're doing like a project search or something along those lines, to really design and deliver in that framework. There's also a host of other resources out there for us to consider, everything from podcasts to a variety of other things. There's lesson plans, there's frameworks, there's grassroots organizations that allow you to think about that. Okay, enough of that. There's other resources, but I am literally running out of time. Number two priority. So we have our resources, Transition Coalition, Ocali. We have this idea of planning and designing, planning and using technology when we're actually thinking about from a IEP perspective and plan and design for that academic year, getting everyone around the table, UDL, plan and design for the instruction we provide, the support we provide, instruction on the job site, be it in school, classrooms, et cetera. But now let's think of some of these digital tools. And I only do have a few more minutes. So I thought I'd start off with not my grandma, but to me, someone that represents technology for our individuals. Now, you have to bear with me for a second, and maybe you've seen this video. She does a little praying, but she also does a little cursing. And so we kind of have to balance that out. But here we go.
Oh, this car is coming. Oh, this car is. Bill, just put me back for me control it. Oh, dear Jesus. I could never. Oh, where's it going? God damn, Bill. Oh, my God. Oh, this is so scary. Oh, Jesus, this is my first day out. I'm about to die.
Oh, come on, relax.
Oh, my God, Bill. I couldn't do it. Oh, is the car coming? Just, oh, my God, they're going to hit us. Oh, it's.
Okay, enough of grandma. Okay, again, not my grandma. I apologize for some of the cursing there. Now, why am I sharing that? Well, I'm sharing that because and my son Nolan has been asking now for a while, Dad, when will we get this driverless car? And there's actually been a lot of research going on in that. And of course, we have cities like Pittsburgh and others that have been equipping their environments, repainting their lines, because a lot of these cars will go off of the lines on the road, et cetera, et cetera. And many of us are buying cars now that have this functionality in them. And of course, you'll see entities like Uber and others that have equipped their cars to be more driverless in the near future for a variety of different reasons. You may have heard about trucks on I-10, supposedly. That's going to be a major corridor there, of course, from Texas going all the way to Florida, et cetera. They're talking about that being a major corridor of driverless trucks. So anyways, the technology is there. And so to me, that is a game changer for our young adults. Now, will they be in driverless cars in the near future? I don't know about that. But if they become universal in the next 5 to 10 years, which it seems to be that's what they'll be, why wouldn't they be able to have an option to potentially pass the driver's test, which might be written part, and then the driverless part where my son would have a challenge, potentially that's where the car itself gives more options for consideration. Now, maybe it's a bit of a pipe dream. I'm living it in terms of a hope for a pipe dream, but think of the technology and how it's altering some of these things. So let's start off with, first of all, tech and change in terms of what we're teaching. All right. So for example, let's say you don't buy the car part, but let's go with what we have now increasingly with transportation, something that's a critical element for our individuals to be self-determined, a level of independence, and basically to be able to access a lot of the things in their environment. Well, we know, of course, we have now car services like Lyft and Uber that are altering what's available to us beyond just taxi systems. But of course, there's a cost to it. But increasingly, we also have, and I've hyperlinked this, folks, we also have increasingly apps, digital apps that are giving us everything from Move It. Move It is a public transportation app that is for countless cities throughout the country, where I can now be in my home. I want to know where the closest not bus station, where I can pick up my bus. My mind is clicking, bus stand, whatever it is, where it is. I'd be given a visual map to walk me there. And then, of course, I can use that app to tell me what bus to take. I don't need to know it's bus 69 or bus 70. I just need to know where I'm going. So either someone in my home helps me connect to where I'm going, or I know, well, I have it programmed in. I'm going to work. Work is at this site. So these types of apps will direct me to the bus stand, will tell me which bus that comes along to get on. It will prompt me to either pull the cord or to basically get off at a certain site. So it's all using the GPS that we're all using in our phones today. There's numerous apps to do this. The app that you have, depending upon the city you live in, already has this if you have public transportation. Of course, some cities do, some cities don't. We live in a community of a little less than 100,000, and they've invested in a bus system. And the bus system here actually will pick the individual up and drop them off if they have a disability. But there's an app that they can record, they can schedule, they can do a variety of different things independently. It's very visually based. So anyways, there's a number of different tools that are altering the transportation process. And why am I saying and emphasizing this? Of course, for independence, but then what do we teach? And what do we spend our time on in terms of some adaptive development if the apps are replacing a lot of those skills previously that we taught? Folks, 25, 30 years ago, I taught as a transition teacher. And I know a lot of things that we covered then, almost all the curriculum we covered then, we would not be covering today because of digital technologies. So that's one in terms of transportation. The other in terms of money, okay? For those of you that love to go, many of you probably aren't even old enough to remember this, but maybe some of you are. I remember on a Friday evening, I'm one of 7, I got to stand in line with my dad at the bank as he went to get money out for Saturday and Sunday to be able to have money to spend. Why was he waiting in long bank lines? Because the ATM wasn't around. Why did I stand in line with my dad? Because I'm one of 7. It was a chance to actually hang out with my dad. But beyond hanging out with my dad, I wouldn't want these lines to come back. And of course, we know that dollars and coins are actually starting to change, and more of it's electronic. Many of us that have teenagers, including me that has a teenager, he doesn't want dollars, he doesn't want change. He has his card, he's good with that, or he has his phone with his Google Wallet or Apple Pay. And of course, more and more, especially I think a silver lining of the pandemic, these have become more universal because we want this touchless type of interaction. Of course, we have Venmo, we have all these other apps to go along with it. So now it's not so much what is $1.25, et cetera, which my goodness, my son is still confused about that, but rather it's finding tools that use for budgeting and for manipulating in terms of how much I have, how much can I spend, et cetera. Many of these tools, and I've hyperlinked off to these in terms of listing for Android and iPod phones, et cetera. But what they offer is a lots of different array of choices. They offer dashboards that are visual based. They offer some very thorough elements that may be too much for our son or daughter, the individual we're serving. But the reality is they're out there. So to me, when I'm thinking about budget and money, I better be informing them about these tools. I better be informing them about the skills they need to interact with these tools. And I'd better be getting them comfortable with elements of the tools. Now, maybe it's not a primary tool, maybe it's the feature of the tools. But this to me is critical in that transition process for that level of independence. And increasingly now, more and more of the bank products are allowing us to work with those so that the individual can be very independent. And I can tell you, Nolan, who his concept of money is extremely limited, is increasingly independent because of what the bank offers, what his phone offers, and what some of these budgetary apps offer. All right. Of course, then there are tools to use technology with interventions. So video modeling is probably one of the biggest ones that many of us, if not all of us, use. And I need to close things down so I can give you a chance for questions. But real quick, video modeling is a perfect example of a digital tool, video, that goes along with a process we know is critical for developing transition to skills, everything from living to learning a job to sequencing to et cetera, video modeling. Video modeling comes in all shapes and sizes. There's a video there when you have a chance to take a look at it, but there's peer modeling, there's self-modeling, there's point of view modeling. And you may be saying, Sean, this is old news, but what's new about that is the tools to edit, the tools to collect the video, the tools to add in other educational elements to help the individual be more independent in the process of the steps of sequence of getting things ready in the morning to following the job steps that need to be done independently without your job coach because you don't have a job coach, to be able to repeat those, to be able to see them visually, et cetera. This is just because of the technology become more and more effective for a process and an approach that's already very effective. And video modeling, by the way, is one of several different examples out there of effective practices that use the technology to go along with it, okay? And lastly, before I leave for questions here, is that increasingly, and of course, one of the top 3 or top 2 skill that we need for employment success, typically developing of those with disabilities, is that social interaction. And we know number 1 or number 2 challenge for many of our individuals is that ability to socially interact. I do have a couple minutes here. I think it's worth to watch Sheldon because Sheldon gives me a smile. So here we go.
When it comes to social skills, I've mastered the big 3. There's the coy smile. There's the friendly chuckle. There's the vocalization of sympathy. Oh.
Okay, we could go on and on and on with Sheldon. But what I wanted to share with you is increasingly, there are technologies out there, folks, that allow for knowledge and acquisition of social skills and also practice. And I want to offer one of them because it's near and dear to my heart. It's being used regularly here. And if you're interested, you can reach out to me about this. It's called VOICE. Yes, I have problems with the phonetic spelling, but it's an acronym for Virtual Reality Opportunities to Implement Social Skills. We have identified 10 social skill domains. It is something we're creating and we created here at the University of Kansas. It has 10 social skill domains. This is free. I'm not selling a product. This is free. In each of those domains, we've created scenarios where a student on an iPad or a Chromebook can interact with these scenarios to develop knowledge and skills of social skills for a middle or high school environment in hopes that they would translate those and generalize those to the classroom. So for example, under self-awareness, there's 25 different scenarios to learn about that. I'm going to go even deeper. These are the skills associated with relationship skills as a domain. These are the 22 different scenarios. These are the skills, and then we have other skills based on our numbers. And again, very difficult to understand here, but the skinny of it is we have 180 plus skills the individual's learning in 140 plus scenarios. So for example, here's a scenario for expressive communication. There's 25 different places to begin. The student doesn't cover all of them. The student only focuses on the ones that are appropriate. And as they go through a hallway, they go through a PE, they go through classrooms, and they experience various things. Let me give you a brief taste of it, and then I'm going to stop here and make sure I'm giving opportunities for questions because I'm cutting it close here. Let me just give you a brief example here. So here we go. It's
couple challenges.
Here we go.
Brian is in the way. You'll want to kindly ask him to move.
So here is an opportunity. There's a narrator talking to me. Brian's in the way of my locker.
Too bad. I'm not moving.
I select a response where Brian basically says, I'm not moving. These responses offer opportunities for the students to understand why they're incorrect, understand why they're correct, and they move through basically in a perspective that they see avatars, they interact with the avatars, they're given opportunities to respond and a variety of other things. So for example, here's a cafeteria environment. Here's an opportunity for them to respond, et cetera, et cetera. But where I'm going with this is increasingly our digital tools to allow us to explicitly teach the social skills needed in employment, to practice those, as well as to begin to look to generalize. And they're independent of any type of curriculum that we'll have to facilitate in classrooms, which at times are problematic because we don't have the time to do those in classrooms, et cetera, et cetera. So it's something to consider in terms of the technologies. So there's so much more on this slide that I haven't shared. I don't know, let's see, I have scrolled down, oh my gosh, I have 162 slides for you guys to consider, okay? And so I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing here and see what questions we might have and give an opportunity for questions here because we're gonna cut off here in about 9 minutes. So I'll pause for a moment, Stephanie, and you can facilitate this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. What great information. As a reminder for those of you joining us, if you will put your questions in the Q&A box instead of the chat box, we'll be sure and catch those. I'm seeing a lot of information, a lot of great things and interest in your voice. One question was, how do we get access to that?
So right now, the best way would be to email me. And so my email was at the beginning and it's the last slide as well. And then I'm going to put it in the chat as we're talking here as well. But at the stage we're at right now, it's an email and then put you in touch with our project staff. And we'll tell you more about how you can get it via for the Chrome and or for the iPad. So.
Excellent. And another question along those same lines, do you have plans to create this for elementary school age students?
So the reality is we've used this down to 4th graders. And so depending upon the individual's disabilities, our target has been middle schoolers because that's when the rubber hits the road. And that's where a lot of the social skill programs are. But we've gone down to 4th grade. So 4th and 5th grade, we think it's still appropriate. But realize I was offering that as an example. There's a number of different apps out there that Social Express and others offer types of social experiences. So anyways, so we've gone down to 4th grade, happy to talk to folks about it, but there are other tools out there too.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we have a parent that said they have a son in the 8th grade. At his IEP meeting, when they're planning for high school, should the VR counselor be at that IEP meeting?
You know, it's an excellent question. There's one of those contexts. I'd say generally speaking, no. Instead, my emphasis, my recommendation would be if you really want a transition person available, that transition to high school would be who in the district is facilitating the transition experiences. It could be the person that's in charge of the 18 to 21 program. It could be someone that is actually separate from that, but they actually are the transition coordinator. If you happen to have a waiver, if you're on a developmental disability waiver, I think your case manager would be an excellent person to have at that transition IEP. But VR at that point, oftentimes in most states, and Stephanie, this may be more of a question to how things work in Texas, but in most states, they're really not going to engage you until you're 18. And so that's one of the reasons I'm suggesting utilize some of the other supports.
And we do here in Texas have VR services that do start with that transition prior to 18. And so I encourage you to check with your school for who you can, who would be available in your area. And check with your regional coordinator with Partners Resource Network.
One of my fears with the too early with a VR person is that, and this is listening to the people across the country, oftentimes the structure of voc rehab, which is awesome, it can be awesome, has a structure that may not align directly with what you need to do at the high school level. And so in a way, you're almost doing parallel work and you're not realizing it. And so that's one of my cautions there. So that's all.
Absolutely. All right. So another question. So what would you recommend to parents that have a student that their dream or their idea of their future is something like being a music star or a doctor? If that's not an achievable goal, how would you recommend a parent handle that?
Well, you know, I think there's so many different ways to address that. I'm going to give you an example and see if it connects the dots. I remember early on in my career, a freshman, it was one of his first IEP, it was his first high school IEP meeting. He wanted to be an NFL football player. And he was on the freshman football team and he wasn't even starting. He had significant learning disabilities and significant attention issues, but he really wanted to be an NFL football player. Well, I can tell you, we utilize that to break down, in order to be in the NFL, you need to go to college. In order to go to college, you're going to need to do the following academic classes. That brought down to, this is what you should be doing your sophomore year. And then also it turns into exercise. It turned into being more for his executive functions. So we didn't worry so much about whether or not he's going to be in the NFL. We worried about, if you really want to go in this trajectory, these are the things you're going to need. But by the way, he actually went off to college and he played at a junior college football. And he didn't start, but it was enough. A junior college accepted him, et cetera, and to do those types of things. And he maintained that focus. I would argue part of it was with this dream for football. So if someone has this dream for medical, a doctor, there's so many things in the medical field now. My goodness, my son was just in Project Search and he spent a semester in the hospital. The hospital has an array of opportunities and a lot of programs exist currently in high schools as well as in the community to volunteer with these medical experiences. So that's another way of potentially connecting, engaging, et cetera. So.
Absolutely. And we've had some interest in making sure that you can access all the resources. And so in the chat box, you will notice links for the presentation. So please be sure and get that so you can access all the resources that Dr. Smith has shared with us. So another question, what curriculum would you recommend for students on their IEP to work on social skills?
Yeah, so I do not have one curriculum. Instead, if anything, I would look at interventions, social narratives, video modeling, social autopsies, the Autism Center, and I'll add this to the presentation, I'll find it. The National Autism Center out of North Carolina has identified a series of evidence-based practices to facilitate social skill development. It's not a curriculum per se, they're interventions that allow them, depending upon grade level, environment, et cetera, to use a variety of different formats. Our voice program actually is based on social narrative evidence. So I do not have a curriculum. And honestly, sometimes those curriculums, the challenge with those is, were they actually designed with language? Were they designed with the visual supports? Were they designed with all the elements for your son or daughter? And it's very difficult because most of them don't have an initial screener to determine that factor. So sometimes you're a round peg in a square hole. And that's a consideration so it's better off to take an intervention like social narratives, video modeling, and then incorporate that to your son or daughter.
Excellent. All right, I'm looking to see if we have one final question that we can share with everyone. I'm not seeing anything else. We've got a couple of questions that feel free to reach out to me. My email address will be on the screen shortly, and I'm happy to answer that. We're getting lots of thank yous and everything in the chat box and in Q&A. So Dr. Smith, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you so much for sharing all of this information with us. It's just some fantastic information. And I really appreciate you taking time to join us today and sharing all this great stuff with us. And so we're going to go ahead and wrap up now. Let me share my screen.
And folks, feel free to reach out. I know I covered a lot, but also potentially didn't cover what you needed. And so feel free to reach out if I can be of help. So.
Absolutely. All right. So again, I just want to thank you one last time. Dr. Smith, I really appreciated all of your information. And I want to thank all of you for joining us for today's webinar. As a reminder, a recording of today's webinar will be available on our website at prntexas.org. And so you can access the recording and a copy of the PowerPoint slide to get all of those resources from there. If you are needing a certificate of attendance, one will be available to you through email. So be sure and click on the link in the email that you'll be receiving and get your certificate of attendance. We also have another webinar coming up next week on November 18th. It's going to be updates to the Dyslexia Handbook. And so we are having this webinar in collaboration with SpedTex, and we're going to have some special guest presenters from Texas Education Agency come and share about the updates to the Dyslexia Handbook. That is going to be at 11 o'clock in the morning in English and at noon in Spanish. So please join us for that. On the screen is contact information for our Director of Statewide Services, our support specialist, and myself. Please be sure and reach out to us if you have any other questions that weren't answered in this webinar, or if there's anything we can do to help us. Also be sure and check out our website at prntexas.org. We have lots of information on that website and upcoming events in your area and across the state. And be sure and like and follow us on Facebook at PRN Texas. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us and hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you, Dr. Smith.
Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Such wonderful information. Thank you so much.
Have a good one. Bye.